Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are digging into a really extensive collection of source material, research, articles, historical analyses, all compiled to scrutinize the foundational claims of the LDS Church.
Right. And our approach today is, well, it's rooted in a guiding principle often attributed to former LDS President J. Reuben Clark.
Yeah.
If we have the truth, it cannot be harmed by investigation. If we have not the truth, it ought to be harmed.
So this is purely an evidence-based investigation. We're just reporting on the facts and the critiques that are presented in these materials.
Exactly.
And for you, the learner, this is a discussion with incredibly high stakes. The sources repeatedly cite LDS leaders, emphasizing that the entire structure of the faith, everything, rises or falls on the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon. So our mission here is to pull apart the major challenges, textual, historical, prophetic, that the source material presents.
Yep.
Okay, so let's jump right into the core textual stuff, specifically focusing on how the Book of Mormon's language seems to, interact with the King James Version of the Bible.
This is where the evidence gets very, very specific. The Book of Mormon is presented as an ancient text, finished around 421 AD.
Right.
But when you actually analyze certain passages, they perfectly mirror the translation choices made by scholars in, 17th century England.
And the clearest example of this hinges on those little italicized words, right? The ones the KJV translators added in.
Precisely. Take the Book of Mormon passage 2, Nephi 19.1. The text dates it to 550 BC.
Okay.
But it quotes Isaiah 9.1 almost word for word from the 1611 AD King James Version. And here's the critical point. The KJV translators often added words for clarity words that weren't in the original Hebrew manuscripts, and they mark these additions by printing them in italics.
So you're saying the source material shows that this 550 BC text somehow includes words that English translators in the 1600s had to invent to make sense of the passage?
That's exactly it. The Book of Mormon text contains the exact italicized words. It just raises this huge question of how an ancient record could have the specific editorial fingerprints of a much, much later English translation.
That feels like a massive linguistic problem.
And the documents show it's not a one-off. There's a second case, 3 Nephi 24.0, which quotes Malachi 3.0. It also has the exact same 7 italicized words that the KJV translators added.
Wow.
But it gets worse. The errors aren't just transcription. In that 2 Nephi passage, the phrase Red Sea is just inserted.
Why is that a problem?
Well, for one, that geographical reference isn't in the original manuscripts of Isaiah. And second, the Red Sea is, it's about 250 miles away from the other places mentioned in that verse.
So it's a geographical error on top of a linguistic one.
Exactly.
Okay, so if the text itself has these, modern English fingerprints, the next logical step is to look at the archaeology of the Book of Mormon's setting in ancient America. The sources highlight some major disconnects there.
Yeah, we're moving from textual analysis to just a complete archaeological absence. The Book of Mormon describes this thriving civilization in the Americas from 2200 BC to 421 AD, using technology and animals that mainstream archaeology says just weren't here until after Columbus.
What are the main anachronisms that the sources cite?
Oh, it's a long list. Things that the book treats as totally commonplace. Horses, cattle, steel, iron, wheat, wheels, chariots, even elephants.
Horses is a big one, I remember.
It is. The word horse shows up over 50 times in the Book of Mormon, but the genetic and archaeological evidence for horses in the Americas during that time frame, it's just not there.
And this absence of evidence becomes really stark when you look at the location of the final battles described in the text.
Absolutely. The source material spends a lot of time on the Hill Cumorah in New York. This is supposed to be the site of these final devastating wars. The text claims 230,000 soldiers died in just the final battle alone.
230,000. That would leave a lot of evidence.
It would necessitate just vast amounts of bones, armor, weapons, artifacts. But expert testimony cited in the sources concludes that the hill is, and this is the quote, archaeologically clean.
Clean for a conflict of that supposed size.
Yeah.
That's incredible. What did the researchers who were actually looking for this stuff conclude?
The materials, quote, Thomas Stewart Ferguson. He was the founder of BYU's Archaeology division. He spent 17 years trying to find Book of Mormon evidence, and he failed. He concluded privately, you can't set Book of Mormon geography down anywhere because it is fictional.
That's a powerful statement from someone who was so invested.
It really is. He saw the contradiction between the text and the actual ground.
And this leads right into another point the sources make, the evolving story about where Native Americans came from.
Right. This shows how the institution handles conflicting evidence. For decades, the Book of Mormon introduction said the Lamanites were the principal ancestors of the Native American Indians. But then, DNA analysis came along.
And showed that Native American origins trace back to Asia, not the Middle East.
Overwhelmingly. So in 2006, the church officially changed the introduction. They altered the language to say that Lamanites were only among the ancestors of the American Indians.
Which the source material sees as a direct admission that the original core claim was, well, refuted by science.
It's a significant shift.
So if the ancient text has modern fingerprints and no archaeological traces, then we have to shift focus to Joseph Smith's immediate environment. This move from ancient claims to local 19th century influences feels like a major turning point in the source material.
It is. The sources argue the Book of Mormon didn't just appear out of a vacuum. It came from this really rich cultural environment in New England. And you find these, startling similarities in both geography and popular folklore.
Okay, let's unpack the geography first. How close are we talking?
It's pretty close. The sources show these maps comparing hypothetical Book of Mormon locations, like the sea east, Riverside, and the land northward, and they line up visually with 19th century New York landmarks near Joseph Smith, like Ontario, the Genesee River, and so on.
Even some of the names.
Yeah, the Book of Mormon place named Kishkumen is strikingly similar to the Kiskiminetas River, and a city named Jerusalem lines up near a town called Jacobsburg.
Interesting. But the cultural stuff, especially the treasure hunting folklore, seems even more direct.
Oh, absolutely. Joseph Smith's early life was deeply involved in folk magic and treasure seeking, what they called money digging. And the sources note he was really into the stories of Captain William Kidd, the pirate.
And how does a pirate connect to the Book of Mormon?
It's the names. The documents highlight that the hill Cumorah, which was spelled Cumorah in the first edition, and the city Moroni, these names are linked to pirate stories about the Comoros Islands, sometimes spelled Cumorah, and its capital city, Moroni.
So the idea is that these key unique names might have just come from local pirate stories that he was immersed in.
That's the argument, yeah.
Okay, now let's get to the literary parallels. The sources point to two books from that time and place that seem to share, well, a lot with the Book of Mormon.
The first is View of the Hebrews, published in 1823. And the coincidence here is that Oliver Cowdery, Joseph Smith's main scribe, he was a member of the author's congregation in Vermont.
Okay, that's a close connection. What were the shared themes?
View of the Hebrews argued that Native Americans were descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. It talked about lost records, Urim and Thummim, but the similarities go way beyond just general concepts.
Give me a specific example that's hard to just write off.
The most striking one is this prophetic narrative. View of the Hebrews describes a prophet standing on a wall, denouncing a city, and then being stoned by the people.
That's exactly the story of Samuel the Lamanite in the Book of Mormon.
It is. And when the LDS scholar B.H. Roberts looked into this, he concluded that the similarities were a serious menace to Joseph Smith's story of the Book of Mormon's origin.
A serious menace. Wow. Okay, and the second book?
The second is The Late War, an 1819 school textbook. It was about the War of 1812. But the key thing is, it was written in this very specific, intentional King James Bible style.
And that's where we get that famous repetitive phrase.
It came to pass. Exactly. The Late War uses it came to pass hundreds of times, just like the Book of Mormon. It also has phrases like rod of iron, descriptions of complex forts, a stripling soldier, a chief captain with 2,000 chosen men.
So the whole structure is there, the voice, the themes, the narratives. The sources are arguing it was all just part of the air in Joseph Smith's world before 1830.
That's the contention, yes.
Let's shift then to how the foundational stories themselves, the translation, the first vision, how those accounts changed over time. This is often where the modern critical view really diverges from the traditional one.
The translation process is a perfect example. The traditional image, the paintings, show Joseph Smith poring over the gold plates.
Right.
But the documented method, which the church now officially acknowledges, was that he often dictated the text by placing a seer stone into a hat to block out the light.
The famous seer stone in the hat.
Yep. The text would reportedly appear on the stone. But the crucial detail the sources highlight is that the gold plates themselves, they were often just wrapped in a cloth off to the side. They weren't being actively used.
Which raises a huge logical question. If the plates were so important that he went through all this trouble to protect them, why weren't they needed for the actual translation?
The logical conclusion the source material draws is that the plates were basically superfluous to the process. It calls the whole narrative about their preservation into question.
And we see a similar kind of evolution with the first vision accounts. I understand he recorded at least 4 different versions.
Yes, and the contradictions are pretty stark, especially between the earliest one from 1832 and the official one from 1838. In the 1832 version, Joseph says he already knew no true church existed, and he was praying mainly for forgiveness of his sins.
But the official story is very different.
It is. The 1838 version is all about his confusion over which church to join. He says it had never entered into my heart that all were wrong. These are just. There are fundamentally different motivations for the entire foundational event of the faith.
And the timing of when the story even started being told is also a key point, isn't it?
Exactly. The historical records show the first vision wasn't widely known or taught, even to early church members, until 12 to 22 years after it supposedly happened. The story just wasn't really circulating in the early 1830s.
This brings us to Joseph Smith's overall track record as a translator. Beyond the Book of Mormon, there are 2 other cases where his abilities were, testable.
And the source material uses these as a critical test. First, the Kinderhook plates in 1843. These were a hoax. Joseph was presented with them, and he translated a portion, claiming they were the history of a descendant of Ham.
And then the hoax was exposed.
Right. Later metallurgical tests proved they were 19th century creations. He failed the test. He interpreted a modern forgery as an ancient record.
And the second, more famous failure is the Book of Abraham.
Correct. When the papyri he used for that translation were rediscovered and given to Egyptologists, they confirmed they were just common Egyptian funerary documents. Specifically, the Book of Breathings.
Nothing to do with Abraham.
Nothing at all. And his interpretations of the illustrations are just fundamentally flawed. He identified the Egyptian god Min, a fertility deity, as God sitting on his throne. He called Osiris Abraham. It's completely disconnected from actual Egyptology.
So the source material presents this logical progression. He failed the test with the Book of Abraham. He failed the test with the Kinderhook plates. The Book of Mormon, the only one of the 3 for which we do not have the original.
Exactly. And this evidence then forces you to look at the consistency of later leaders. The materials show this pattern, where what was taught as eternal doctrine by one prophet gets condemned as false doctrine by a later one.
Which creates a huge problem if you're commanded to always follow the prophet.
Yeah, a massive problem. Brigham Young is the clearest example. He taught the Adam God theory, that Adam is God the Father. He taught blood atonement, and that polygamy was absolutely essential for exaltation.
And all of those have been disavowed.
Vigorously. Subsequent prophets, like Spencer W. Kimball, condemned them. Apostle Bruce R. McConkie called the Adam God theory a damnable heresy. So you have an apostle telling members to reject what a previous prophet taught as sacred truth.
This pattern also applies to the priesthood ban against black males.
It does. For nearly 130 years, black men were denied the priesthood. And when the church released its 2013 essay on this, it said there were no clear insights into the origins of this practice.
But the source materials show that earlier leaders gave a very clear origin.
He did. A 1949 First Presidency statement clearly attributed the ban to a direct commandment from the Lord based on theories about the curse of Cain. So the church later disavowed the theories that 10 previous prophets taught and framed the origin as a mystery rather than retracting a direct commandment.
Finally, the source material moves to financial transparency and ethical concerns.
Yes, since 1959, the church has stopped releasing detailed financial disclosures. The documents draw this really pointed contrast between the estimated $1.5 billion spent on the City Creek Center shopping mall,
The luxury mall, yeah.
and the $1.4 billion in total humanitarian aid reported over a 26-year period.
That comparison is really striking. $1.5 billion for a mall versus $1.4 billion for global aid over almost 3 decades.
It creates a clear metric for the critique's point about priorities. And this connects to the tithing counsel given to members. The sources cite official church magazines instructing members to pay tithing, even if it means not being able to pay for rent, utilities, or even food for their family.
And this often goes hand in hand with what the documents call a culture of anti-intellectualism.
Right. It's summarized by quotes, where leaders tell members not to research unapproved material and assert it is wrong to criticize the leaders of the church even if the criticism is true. It promotes obedience over inquiry.
So, after all this, what does this entire deep dive mean for you, the learner? We've gone through dozens of points: KJV errors, no archaeology, changing first vision stories, failed translations, shifting doctrine.
The key takeaway from the source material is the cumulative effect. To make it all work, you have to accept these massive redefinitions where translate doesn't actually mean translate, horses aren't really horses, and yesterday's prophets were just men teaching false theories.
The documents even quote LDS historian Richard Bushman admitting the dominant narrative is not true, it can't be sustained. The sources conclude that the foundational claims are just undermined by this mountain of contradictory evidence.
Which leaves us with this fundamental tension. If faith is supposed to bridge a small gap where evidence is lacking, what do you call it when you believe despite an overwhelming abundance of evidence to the contrary?
And here's a final provocative thought for you to carry with you. The source documents note that people who rely only on spiritual feelings often get powerful confirmation for things that are mutually exclusive. You see it in Mormon splinter groups who all use the same spiritual witness to validate completely contradictory beliefs. So if feelings are your only guide, how do you really distinguish between inspiration and just, emotion or desire when the factual data is so inconsistent? That tension between feeling and fact is certainly something to mull over.